Breslov in the Ukraine. And Rabbi Nachman first set it down on paper over 200 years ago. It's a story of good deeds and compassion and features, food items that you may not be familiar with. It's a bread called challah. It's very beautifully woven. It's made of eggs and yeast, and it's simply delicious. It's often eaten on the Sabbath and at holidays. So my story, the Rooster Prince of Breslov, begins. Quite a long time ago, there was a young prince in Breslov who had everything. He only had to think of something and it was delivered. If he was hungry for a piece of bread, what was delivered but trays of the most gorgeous, buttery, flaky pastries? If he was hungry for an apple, platters of exotic fruits and glorious bowls of candied plums were brought before him. This is not quite great, healthy eating, nor is it good food for the soul for a young child. On walks, all he had to do was look at a ball out in the yard or a pony, a tree full of singing birds, and it was bundled up and delivered to him at the palace. Of course, there was no one to play ball with. Poor prince had had enough. And one day, in the middle of a lavish lunch, presided over by his mom and dad, the king and the queen, and all the courtiers, he withdrew from the table, stood up with a stump, tore off his clothes, hunched down on the floor, clawed it with his toes, and his arms started flapping like wings, and he went wop, 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 wop. As you might imagine, the entire room was quiet. They were all stunned. What is this prince doing, acting like a chicken? And he looked at the king and the queen, and he let out a and at that, they rushed to his side and took him to another room. For a week, he spoke not one human syllable, not one word that they could understand at any rate. He never put on an article of clothing. After a week had passed, the king and the queen were beside themselves. They were at their wits' end. So the king offered an entire bag of gold to the person who could cure their son. As you might imagine, throngs of people showed up. The first was a doctor, and in he walked with his medicine. He spied the prince. He noted his skin tone was good. He happened to touch his side. Good temperature. Then he took a vial of medicine from his chest, tried to open the mouth of the prince, at which point the prince and he pecked his hand and chased him from the room. Outside, the king and the queen, who had been looking through the keyhole, asked the doctor, what were you able to do for our son? And the doctor replied, Your Majesty, your son has the worst case of roosterism I have ever seen. Roosterism. You must call for the physician. And so he left for the next day. Not one magician showed up. No, 20 magicians showed up. As they were ushered to the room where the prince was kept, they came in with their long cloaks, chanting incantations at the furniture, the floor, beaming it onto the prince, and the other 10 sprinkled potions on the furniture, the floor, and as they approached the prince, he started, and he started pecking at their legs, pecking at their gowns, and out the door they left. The king and the queen did not see anyone who could cure their son until the 7th day. There was one person left. It was a frail old man with a long coat, boots, and a very long gray beard. And he looked to him, and the queen asked, "Have you no medicine? Have you no potions?" And the frail old man replied, "I have none of those, Your Majesty, but you give me 7 days, and you comply with my wishes, and I will return to you a prince ready to rule." The king replied, "A week." And the old man said, "Many marvelous things have been wrought within 1 week." The queen looked to the king, and the king looked to the queen, and they looked at the old man. They had no other alternatives. So they complied with their wish. They showed him to the loft room where the prince was pecking the hard kernels of corn on the ground. And the old man quietly walked in, at which point the prince rushed him. And the old man replied quietly, "Cock-a-doodle-doo." The prince was taken aback. "What are you doing?" The old man took off his overcoat and his boots, and naked he hunched down on the ground next to the prince. He said, "Well, I'm a little hungry." And he pecked up kernels of corn from the ground. "Would you be willing to share some of your corn with me?" The prince didn't know what to do. He hadn't shared a single thing in his entire life. And all he could think of to say was, "Do you know who I am?" And the old man looked at him. "Well, of course, you're a rooster, just like me." Oh, 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 oh. And so contentedly, they pecked at the corn that day. And that evening, the prince lay down on the cold, bare ground, and so did the old man. The 2nd day passed much like the first, walking and plucking and eating corn, until in the evening, the old man spied something that had been slipped in the corner of the room, and he asked the prince, "What are those?" And he says, "Those are mattresses." And the old man thought, "Well, what are they for?" And the prince replied, "That's for people to sleep on so they're comfortable at night." And the old man looked at those mattresses and rubbed his neck, because sleeping on the floor is not kind to an old man. And he said, "Boy, those people, they have all the comforts." And the prince looked at him and he said, "I don't think it would be any trouble if an old rooster like you slept on the mattress tonight." And without another word, the old man lay down and fell asleep. The next morning, he woke up to find the prince sleeping on the mattress next to him. And what was that smell? Glorious smell filled the air. He nudged the prince away, and he said, "Prince, what do I smell?" The prince rubbed his eyes and said, "Oh, that's warm, brown bread, freshly baked." And the old rooster asked him, "And what is that for?" He said, "Well, humans eat it, and it's quite luscious with pads of butter on it. I see no trouble for an old rooster such as yourself to have some soft food. And so he started to eat it, and butter was dribbling down the old man's chin and into his beard, and the prince soon joined him, and they had that wonderful bread together. The next morning, they woke up again to the smell of burned bread. But it appeared differently. It was lying above the floor, and the old man asked the prince, "What is that?" "Oh," the prince replied, "that's a table and chairs. People like to be comfortable when they eat. I see no reason why an old rooster such as yourself shouldn't be comfortable." And soon thereafter, the prince joined him at the table. Now that night, somebody had entered the room, opened the window. So, near dawn, they woke up and they were very cold. "I'm so cold," said that old man. The prince replied, they seemed to understand that they were freezing! And as the light filtered in through the room, the prince saw a blanket on the ground, and forgetting he was a rooster, he ran to that blanket, and he brought it back to his old friend, and they huddled together under a blanket. That evening, they slept on a mattress, they woke again to fresh baked bread, but the room was even colder. And as they sat huddling together under the blanket, the old man asked the prince, "Since you're so familiar with people's ways, what clever habit do they have to keep themselves warm on a day like today?" And the prince said, "Why, people wear clothes." And he pointed to their bundle of clothes. And the old man put on his overcoat and his woolen trousers and his boots. He says, "This is delicious." And the prince, buttoning up the shirt, he had it worn for over a month, said, "Brilliant!" And they were warm, very warm together. And after they had finished their bread, they were walking around the room, and as night fell, in came a huge steaming pot of stew, candlesticks, that beautiful braided challah bread, a chocolate, and olive. And the old man asked the prince, "What is this?" And he replied, "This is the Sabbath feast." And the old man looked at the spread, and a smile spread across his face. And he said, "Let's stand and light the candles together. For it is only poor roosters that have to huddle on the ground." And so they sat down to a gorgeous feast. And after they were finished, the old man looked at the prince solemnly and said, "My dear friend, a week has passed, and it is time for me to go home. How I feel sorry for you, for roosters are not treated kindly in this house. Roosters have no warmth, no bosom own friend. And the old man stroked his beard and said, you know, things might not be so bad, for you look a lot like a man. In fact, you are the splitting image of the royal prince. And that prince got up from his chair, all indignant. Have you not seen me strutting and looking, clawing the ground, eating the kernels of corn on the ground? I am a rooster. I am no man. And the old man looked at him and said, you are the very person who brought me a blanket, who shared the Sabbath feast. And you are lucky enough to look like a man, for you have certainly acted like one. At this, the prince was a little mystified, and he sat there thinking, don't you know, he didn't stand up again from the table, believing he had grown a few inches taller. And that, my friends, is how the Prince of Breslov grew to be a flying king. Thank you. Sorry, just one little second left. And when he was grown, walking outdoors with his son, under the blue skies and the warm sun, listening to his son whistling a tune, he could believe that for a little time he had been. Okay, thank you.